Hello my friends, we're going to learn how to see athletic ability in the birth chart using a system of astrology known as vibrational astrology. Using vibrational astrology, we can find similar astrological patterns in a group of people, and in this case we're going to be looking at athletes, some of the greatest athletes of all time. Now, it is very difficult or impossible to see patterns that are common to a group of people using other systems of astrology. For example, you are not going to find that the greatest athletes of all time have Mars in a fire sign or Mars trine Uranus. You can look through the charts yourself. I don't think you'll be able to find it. If you do find it, let me know. Let the rest of us know, because it'd be very exciting. I've looked all over the place to find consistent patterns in a group of people, and the only kind of patterns I can find are these vibrational patterns, and they are exciting, they're wonderful, it's really extraordinary, and I'm going to show you this now. Now, some of you may be familiar with the research of Galcoin, and you may say, oh, there are other things such as the Galcoin sectors. Well, if there are Galcoin sectors, they're very subtle. What we're going to see with these vibrational patterns is that they're not that subtle. They're clear, they're intricate, they're beautiful. They explain in detail the qualities of the athlete. This is just incredibly exciting stuff. And the implications of these findings can hardly be exaggerated. If astrology can actually identify patterns between the planets, astrological configurations, sometimes they're called AstroSignatures, something in common in the sky, when people who have something in common, such as extraordinary athletic ability, if that can be found, we can hardly exaggerate the implications of this. This opens up an entire new field of study. Even many astrologers are very skeptical that astrology is capable of doing this. And myself and a small team of other researchers are finding consistent things, and we're working on athletic ability right now, and in the next few months I'll be making some more videos showing some of the more recent discoveries, which are just mind-boggling. So we may be on our way to developing, you could call it a science of astrology, and I know that that term is controversial. It grates against the nerves not only of non-astrologers but even astrologers. But as Galileo said, look through the telescope and see what we're doing here. Okay. Now, what are the astrological configurations that help make a great athlete? What we found is that they are aspect patterns, patterns between the planets. Many of you who are students of astrology know about patterns like grand crosses, etc. Also, what are known as midpoint patterns. I'll show you examples of these in the next slide so it makes it clear. But just to introduce the idea, these great athletes will have at least 4 of the 7 power planets in an aspect pattern. And the 7 power planets are these: Sun, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto. All of the 10 planets except the Moon, Venus, and Neptune. By the way, you know in astrology we call the Sun and Moon planets. Well, duh, they're not planets, but as a generic term for those things we use in astrology, we call them planets, and Pluto is arguably not a planet, but we're including it as one of the 7 objects that is important. So at least 4 of these 7 planets will be in an aspect pattern. That's what creates the potential to be a great athlete. Now, if one of the aspects is out of orb, so when you have 4 planets in aspect to each other, one or more of the aspects might be out of orb with the orbs that we're using. We do have specific orbs, and if one of them is out of orb, then one of the 4 planets must aspect 2 other power planets for a total of 6 of the 7 power planets. So in other words, we have a specific formula. The formula is, I have it in big capital letters here, many power planets are all within orb of aspecting each other. It's really simple. You have 4 planets all aspected to each other in a pattern, it creates this dynamic system of energy that gives the potential to be a great athlete. And if one of the aspects, among all the aspects between the 4 planets, if it's out of orb, this has to be compensated by 2 other power planets aspecting that planet. Now, this sounds reasonable. You might be surprised that midpoints can be important, but the idea that there are patterns between powerful planets sounds reasonable. Now, by the way, note that we're not using zodiac signs or house placements in this analysis, just because so far we haven't found them to work consistently. Now, what I did is I went to 2 different websites to find lists of the greatest athletes of all time. This is important that I don't cherry pick the athletes. These athletes were picked from a list of the greatest. And 14 of these athletes were in both lists, so they really stand out as exceptional athletes that different websites agree about, that they're fantastic athletes, and 13 of the 14 meet this formula. And the one who does not would meet this formula, would have this configuration of 4 planets in a pattern if she was born 15 minutes later. So perhaps she was. So the point is, this formula works very, very well. Now, some surprises. I've got a surprise for you. The first surprise is that these aspect patterns, which again, they make sense. You might expect that great athletes would have these power planets all aspected to each other, but it's not in the natal chart. That's the first surprise. It's in the 7th harmonic chart or the 35th harmonic chart. These are the ones that are most common. Now, this is when a lot of astrologers, their attention starts to fade. They say, oh, give me a break. The 7th harmonic, no way. You're out there fishing for some crazy thing, because the assumption is that these aspects are very subtle, and the idea of vibrational astrology is that they are not subtle, and it's the assumption that they're subtle that has prevented astrologers from discovering these things. So the 7th harmonic is the harmonic of discipline and focus. So these athletes have power planets in the harmonic of discipline and focus. And 35 is a combination of focus and play, so it's working hard at a sport. And these are the 2 most common. You'll also see some other 7-based harmonics show up in particular sports. 77 will show up where there's great speed, because 11 can give speed. So super fast controlled action, such as in boxing, for example. You'll also see 21, 63, 21 and 63, which is 3 times 7 and 9 times 7, in sports that require gracefulness. And we're going to see 91 show up in some very rare, but shows up in some particular sports. So they're all 7-based harmonics. That's the first surprise for most astrologers. The second surprise is that when we analyze these patterns in the harmonic chart, we will be looking at trines and sextiles, conjunctions, opposites, and squares, the aspects we expect. But also, we will be looking at semi-squares, the 45 degrees, and the sesquiquadrat, 135 degrees. And even the 1/16, 3/16, 5/16, and 7/16 aspects in the harmonic chart. Now again, this can sound unbelievable even to astrologers. It can sound like nonsense. Like I'm way out, fishing around for things, because of the assumption that these theories cannot possibly work. But let me give you an intuition that hopefully will help you sense that maybe this isn't so outrageous, so incredible. Let's look at nature. We know that nature has beautiful and intricate patterns. Is it possible that astrology also has beautiful and intricate patterns? So I've put some images up here, just to remind us this is what nature does. Nautilus shells and sunflowers and peacock feathers, and I'm not sure what this is. I think this is a kiwi fruit. I'm not even sure, but spider webs. So nature has incredibly intricate, beautiful patterns. I think this is sand on a desert. I'm not sure. The patterns made by wind combining with other things. I think this is a tree. It's just amazing. Of course, leaves and flowers. Incredibly beautiful, intricate patterns. Just for fun, just because it's a lot of fun to look at the beauty of nature. Zebras and all kinds of stuff. Incredibly intricate, beautiful patterns. So is it so unbelievable that if you have this idea, as above, so below, or as within, so without, or some resonance or some connection, however you want to think of what astrology is supposed to be telling us, that astrology itself might also have beautiful, intricate, mind-boggling patterns that are reflected in nature. Doesn't seem like that big of a jump, but for many astrologers it's a huge jump. They've gotten used to thinking of astrology in a certain way, and it becomes difficult for them to believe that the astrology could have this intricate tapestry of energies, and it does. And once you open yourself up to it, a whole new world opens up, and we are actually developing a science. We're getting replicable results. We're doing this little by little because all of us have day jobs. We don't get to sit around getting funded by an institute to figure this stuff out, so we just do it on weekends or a few hours in an evening, trying to squeeze a little time in to do the research. And with the little bit of time we have, the findings are really amazing. I can't resist. I made some more slides of beautiful patterns of nature. You don't need more slides to see it, but it's just fun to look at and to really feel deeply what I'm saying here, because it's really marvelous what we are discovering now, and it would be good for astrology, I believe, to open up to this awareness of this whole new dimension of astrology that we call vibrational astrology. And here, by the way, here's a planet mandala. These are taken from the Series 2.0 software. These are patterns created by planetary orbits. So here's another pattern. Endless, incredible, beautiful patterns created by the orbits of planets. I've got some videos on planet mandalas if you want to watch those later. But that's not my topic right now. I'm getting maybe a little bit distracted here, emphasizing this point on the intricacy of planetary relationships and the intricacy of nature, and how, if we open up to this intricacy, we will discover what makes a great athlete. And to give you an idea, a preview, I will go through the athletes in detail. This, by the way, I don't think I mentioned it, this is the first in a series of videos, because I've got so much material. This may take a few hours, so I'm going to break this up into sections. Okay, now to give you an idea, a preview of what we will be seeing these athletes, this is the 35th harmonic chart. So there's something called a harmonic chart. I have a series of videos on harmonic charts. You can watch those if you haven't to get a better understanding of what harmonic charts are. But you don't really have to jump over there now if you're not familiar with it. It's a chart that reveals a 35 beat, you might call it, a rhythm of 35 in the chart. And when you put Wayne Gretzky, who was picked by these websites as among one of the most incredible athletes of all time in any sport, he happened to be a hockey player, but of all sports, of all time, this fellow Wayne Gretzky was picked as one of the greatest by sports enthusiasts. What makes him so fantastic? Well, when you go to the beat of 35, this rhythm of 35, the 35th harmonic chart, it stands out, and it stands out really clearly. You see the 4 power planets, Mars opposition Pluto, Jupiter square Saturn, in a beautiful symmetric pattern. We consider symmetrical patterns to be beautiful. They're very powerful. And we see this semi-square. This is the 45 degrees that I mentioned before, and the other 45 degrees takes this 90 degrees and cuts it in half. So you get this symmetric pattern, all hard aspects, all strong aspects. The thickness of the lines relates to how strong the aspect is, in other words, how small the orb is. All the lines are thick. We have a Mars, Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn. This is exactly what we expect. On top of that, he also has a Sun, Mercury, Saturn grand trine. Just to add more to it, our requirement is to have 4 planets in a pattern. He has it. And then one of those planets is also in a grand trine with 2 others, just for more emphasis. Notice none of the lines is extremely thin. They're all solidly there, and these are all power planets, all 6 of them. It's an amazingly impressive configuration in an amazingly impressive athlete. And we get reinforcing midpoint structures because this is symmetrical. Mars is opposition. The Jupiter-Saturn midpoint is how we read this. This is the planet at the midpoint of these 2. 20-minute orb. This is 20 minutes in the harmonic chart. This harmonic chart is blown up 35 times. So in the actual chart, the relationship is under a minute orb. Anyway, I don't want to, fry your brain with too much technical detail. It's very simple. You look at these harmonic charts, they reveal what makes Wayne Gretzky Wayne Gretzky. How amazing is that? We are really discovering what is astrologically behind making somebody such an extraordinary athlete. Symmetrical patterns. We have Mars at Jupiter, Saturn. Pluto is also at the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint, conjuncted, only a 9-minute orb. And then because of the grand trine, we have Saturn as opposition Sun, Mercury. And then there's another thing that gets involved. This one's probably not as important. This involves a planet that's not a power planet. They can add a little bit. Anyway, that's not so important. The important thing is we have this huge pattern. It's symmetrical, which means there are reinforcing midpoint structures with extremely small orbs. Very unusual pattern. You will not see this in many charts for a very extraordinary athlete. Okay, by the way, that Neptune at Mars Jupiter, that's these dashed lines. There's the Mars Jupiter, which is part of this 4-planet pattern. And there's Neptune with the dashed lines, means 16ths. So even Neptune gets involved. I mentioned we use even 16th harmonic aspects, and that's an example of it. And just for a little extra measure, not as if we need more, because this pattern's so incredible to begin with, even one of the non-power planets, they can add a little bit to the overall intensity of it. Not so important. The main thing is the 7 power planets. So there you have it, my friends. I've explained to you, let's review. I've explained that there are planetary patterns that are similar in the greatest athletes of all times. These planetary patterns are based on what we call vibrational astrology. Vibrational astrology is a system of astrology where we believe that minor aspects like the septiles and so on are not minor. They're very important. And in particular harmonics, particular vibrations, athletes will have very strong patterns of these power planets, and those harmonics typically are 7 and 35, and also for some sports you'll see 21, 63, and a few others that can show up. But here's 35, very, very common. 35 gives fantastic athletic ability in almost any sport. He could have been a great athlete in other sports. He happened to grow up with hockey all around him. His father played hockey. He got trained from an early age. It happened to be the one that he got exposed to and fell in love with. From an astrological viewpoint, we could see that if he was brought up in a different environment with different exposure, he just has incredible athletic ability and could be great in many sports. And one of the reasons why 35 makes you such a fantastic athlete is it's a combination of 7 discipline and 5. It's 7 times 5. And 5 is enjoying the play and loves the game. Okay. So, we're getting an idea. Now, 21 and 63. That's the 7 times 3 and 7 times 3 times 3. In other words, 7 times 9 equals 63. They're very important for games like baseball, sometimes for tennis, because in these sports, the emphasis is on smoothness of the swing. The swing of the bat or the racket must be smooth. You have to avoid erratic, sudden, impulsive, or inconsistent behavior. You have to have that smooth swing. If it's tennis, it's smooth, strong swing with the right top spin on the ball, etc. It's all about a graceful, powerful, smooth, consistent swing. So you get the smoothness of 3, just as astrologers have always known. 3, which means 1/3 is a trine, gives smoothness, and 3 times 3 also gives smoothness. So you get smooth, disciplined behavior that often shows up in these particular sports. The player must respond quickly and spontaneously, but also avoid losing the graceful, harmonious, and consistent behavior that produces effective results. Okay. Now 91. 91 showed up in only one athlete, as we will see in the later in the following sequence, additional videos, because I won't get to all this in this video. I'm already 20 minutes into this. The 91st shows up in one athlete. It's 91 is 7 times 13. It's not by itself enough. It's not enough by itself to make a great athlete, but it can be helpful, especially for extreme sports, where you achieve a kind of transformation or transfiguration through the sport. Well, we'll see. The athlete is Bruce Lee. So this kind of extreme inner training where you're transforming yourself, the 91 can be very helpful. It's not enough by itself. You still need some basic you need some aspects in your 7th harmonic chart as well. But the 7 times 13 will add some ability for these sports that are extreme sports and involve a personal transformation. So the 91st harmonic gives a sense of mission, purpose, and destiny. The sport is a discipline that opens a door to a higher level of functioning. There can be a sense of transcendence or a lineage of power from authorities or gurus. In some cases, the athlete develops extraordinary and almost superhuman abilities through willpower and focused effort. So you'll find this in people like Bruce Lee, for example. But you must also have some strong aspects in the 7th harmonic chart as well to be able to perform that sport at a great level. Now, let me clarify what I mean by a pattern. Here are some examples of 4 planet patterns. Let's look at them. Here's 2 planets. I've just put here, 4 power planets. It could be any of the 4 power planets. I haven't put Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, but it could be any 4 power planets where 2 of them are square and then 2 are conjunct, and it's a sesquiquadrat, 135 degrees from both Sun and Mars to Saturn, from Sun and Mars to Jupiter and to Saturn, using the planets I happen to pick here. So this conjunction, both planets, sesquiquadrat Jupiter and sesquiquadrat Saturn, and Jupiter Saturn square each other. Now you can start to appreciate what I mean by an aspect being out of orb. What if his Sun is conjunct Mars and Sun is sesquiquadrat Saturn, but Mars is out of orb of sesquiquadrat Saturn? The sesquiquadrat is going to get a small orb. I'll talk about what the orbs are later. But it's got a small orb, so it might be that Sun is within orb, but Mars is not. Not good enough. Not good enough to be one of the greatest athletes of all time. It's good enough to give you great athletic ability, but we're talking about the best of the best. And all of them must be in orb. Now, if Mars was out of orb and everything else is in orb, and Mars aspects 2 other power planets, such as Uranus and Pluto, or Mercury and Uranus, then that will give Mars some additional power, you might say, some additional circuitry, some additional strengthening of the pattern. We can phrase this in different ways to give it enough strength, enough circuitry, a strong enough pattern to become one of the greatest of the greatest. So you can imagine these patterns where all the planets are in orb, or if a planet is out of orb in just one aspect that it's involved with 2 others, extremely rare. So that's an example of a pattern. Another example, 2 planets conjunct, square a planet, and then this third planet, a fourth planet, I should say, is semi-square one and sesquiquadrat the others. So you can see there's a lot of possible patterns. You could have a grand trine, where at one of those points of the grand trine, two planets are conjunct. You could also have a sextile trine pattern. That's another pattern. You could have a planet, opposition two planets, and they're trine and sextile the other planet. Another example is where sixteenths get involved, because we use 16th harmonic aspects. They can have very small orbs, but suppose you have a T-square, Sun, Mars, Jupiter T-square, means a square in opposition, and Saturn comes in and makes 16th harmonic aspects to Sun, Mars, and Jupiter. 16th means a 1/16th, a 3/16th, a 5/16th, or 7/16th aspect to these three planets. That's a strong pattern. You could also have three planets conjunct trine another planet. So I'm just confirming that the four planets get involved in a pattern. Now you may say to yourself at this point, well, with so many patterns you always find something. No, actually you won't always find something. And the other point is that astrology is what it is. I mean, if you're cynical, if you're skeptical, if you're not open to these possibilities, then you can always find an a priori reason to dismiss the whole theory. Nature is intricate. The planetary patterns are intricate. There's a sophisticated tapestry of energies that are going on, these astrological patterns that reflect the behavior on Earth. And as our research progresses, we're now conducting research that goes to yet another level. Maybe within 3 or 4 months, I'll be ready to present some new tutorial videos on the newest discoveries that we're making. Okay, but anyway, you could just have four planets all conjunct. Sun, Mars, Jupiter, they're all conjunct, all within orb. Now remember, this is all happening in a harmonic chart, not in the natal chart. You could have three planets opposition a fourth. You could have two planets opposite two others. You could have a T-square with two of the planets in the T-square are conjunct. You could have a grand cross, it's called. You know, four planets all square in opposition to each other. You could have three planets conjunct, square a fourth. You could have a sextile opposition pattern. So these are just examples to make it clear what we mean by an astrological pattern. Now here, on the bottom, I have examples of four planets in midpoint structures, and this is what we call a string. Sun to Mars, this angle is the same as Mars to Jupiter, is the same as Jupiter to Saturn. So four planets equally spaced will put Mars at the midpoint, right between Sun and Jupiter, and it would put Jupiter right between Mars and Saturn. So you get two direct midpoint structures. Direct means a planet is conjunct or opposition the midpoint of two other planets. Two direct midpoint structures out of four planets. And if these two midpoint structures are within orb of the orb we allow, and I will discuss orbs later, then that's a valid pattern. Here's another example. We call this a pyramid. One planet, in this case Jupiter, between Sun and Mars, and then Saturn is between Sun and Jupiter. Again, just like the string, we have two midpoint structures formed out of four planets. This is an opposition pyramid. It's the same as a pyramid, except one of the planets, instead of Saturn being over here, it's flipped over to the other side. See that? Sun, Jupiter, Mars. Sun, Jupiter, Mars. So both of these have the same Sun, Jupiter, Mars, but Saturn is on the opposite side. It's still a pyramid. Two direct midpoint structures formed out of four planets. Sometimes we call it an opposition pyramid to show that at least one planet was actually opposition to the midpoint. Just as important as a regular pyramid. And this is a midpoint isotrap. Midpoint isotraps are the most powerful of all four of these. And it's very simple. It's just one planet making two midpoint structures. But a midpoint isotrap is extremely powerful. And because there are many resonances, many similar angles. The Mars-Saturn angle is the same as the Jupiter-Uranus angle. The Mars-Uranus angle is the same as the Jupiter-Saturn angle. The Sun is at the midpoint of these two. It's also at the midpoint of these two. This is very simple thing, just a planet making two direct midpoint structures, but it's very powerful. So these are some of the most common patterns you'll see. So it's clear now, I think, right? I wanted to go over what we mean by a pattern. There are obviously some other possibilities, but they're all based around grand trines or T-squares or variations of the patterns I've shown you here, and these are the four kinds of possible midpoint patterns. Okay, we now know what the basic idea is. Let's review, and we're almost done. We're going to end this video here and pick up with a second video in this series. So let's summarize what we learned in this first video, in this series of videos on athletic ability. What we learned is that there are astrological patterns that people have in common. The greatest athletes of all time have something in common. What they have is the power planets all wired up with each other. And they're wired up in a 7-based harmonic. That's what we learned. And we learned what wired up means. We learned what those kinds of patterns are. And the last thing I'm going to show you is this slide. These are the 14 athletes. The 14 athletes that I studied appear on two different websites as the greatest athletes of all time. So if you go to Google or whatever search engine you like and you type greatest athletes of all time, you'll find websites like this where people give their list of the greatest athletes of all time. Sometimes people vote for them. So this is critically important, because if I pick the greatest athletes of all time, then my whole study is subject to selection bias. You can always find somebody to fit a theory. There's no selection bias here. I picked out the people from two different lists to confirm each other. So on one list, we had these 12 people appeared in the top 50, and in another list, Wayne Gretzky, for example, is number 1 in one list. He's number 17 in the other. Michael Jordan, number 2 in one list, number 1 in the other. Muhammad Ali, 3 in one. He's 6 in the other. So they're agreeing. Pele is number 4 and number 5 in these lists. So they're coming out, with high rankings. Now, Tom Brady did not appear on this list, but he was number 7. So these first 6 are clearly among the best. So I analyze these first 6, and then I analyze the 8 others who do not appear extremely high in both lists. Okay, so let me see what I say here. In parentheses is the ranking on the second list. Yeah, okay, so these are the people. And then we've got, these were the top 12. And then we had Willie Mays and Dan Gable, who did not appear in the top 50 here, but as one of the top 25 here. So they scored high on the second list. They did appear on the first list, but not as high. So they're 2 other people that appeared in both lists. So I've got 6 super top professionals and 8 others that appear in both lists, but on one list not quite so high. We're going to analyze these 14 charts. We're going to find out that 13 of 14 of them have this pattern. The one who doesn't almost has it. If she was born 15 minutes later, she would indeed have the same pattern. So this is called extreme case sampling. Extreme case sampling on the independent variable. It's very powerful. It's an effective way to determine what works in astrology. It removes selection bias. Extremely important. In this case, we have 14 charts. 14 is a good number for me, because if I have 80 or 90 charts, I don't have time to analyze 80 or 90 charts. I can make time to analyze 14 charts. Like most people, I have a limited amount of time. I spend most of my time writing astrology software. I teach classes. I make these videos. So like most people, I'm busy. And in research, you have to take practical steps. You can't wait to get funding of millions of dollars from some agency if that's not going to happen. You work with what you've got, And one of the reasons I like extreme case sampling is that I can do it. I don't have to spend years collecting the data. It's already in the Sirius 2.0 software. I can use the power of the internet. I can grab this stuff and I can conduct a important and valuable research study that's, you might say, of academic quality, where we're using a standard research methodology. We're doing extreme case sampling on an independent variable, and we find some incredible things. I've given you an idea with the chart of Wayne Gretzky what they look like. And what I'm going to do in the next videos, I'm going to do one of the first 6 athletes in a separate video, so the videos aren't extremely long. I'll do the Wayne Gretzky again, and then we'll go through the other 5, and then I'll show you some other research that we did confirming that athletes have this in their chart, and then we'll look at the charts of the other 8 people, and we'll draw some conclusions. So it's going to take a number of videos in a series of videos, and I'll compile this all together into one video with links, so you've got it all in one place. Okay, that's it for our first video. We've laid the groundwork. You've got the concepts. Now we're going to look in these next videos at the patterns in each of these incredible athletes. Thank you very much for listening. God bless. Namaste.